For 18 years, I shared a home with a husband who refused to touch me. I thought his coldness was my punishment for an affair, until a doctor asked about a surgery I never had. I denied it, but my body told a different story. Then a simple blood test after my son's accident revealed the truth. My marriage was not just broken by my mistake, it was built on a trap set 30 years ago. My name is Lucy White, and for the last 18 years, I have been a ghost haunting my own marriage. I sat on the edge of the examination table in a sterile medical office in Tampa, Florida, shivering despite the heavy humidity pressing against the windows outside. The air conditioning was set to a temperature that felt less like comfort and more like preservation, keeping everything crisp, cold, and detached. Doctor. Marlo sat with her back to me. The only sound in the room was the rhythmic, relentless clicking of her mouse. Click, click, click. It sounded like a countdown, though I had no idea what we were waiting for. I stared at a poster on the wall detailing the stages of bone density loss, trying to detach myself from the indignity of the paper gown crinkling around my waist. Doctor. Marlo spun her chair around. She was a woman of sharp angles and direct gazes, the kind of doctor who did not believe in softening blows. She looked at her screen, then at me, her expression unreadable behind rimless glasses. Lucy, I need to ask a few standard questions about your sexual history to update our records, she said, her voice flat. Is there any chance you could be pregnant? I almost laughed. It would have been a bitter, jagged sound, so I swallowed it. No, 0 chance. And are you currently sexually active? The room felt suddenly smaller. This was the question I dreaded every year, the one that forced me to acknowledge the vast, arid desert of my life. I looked down at my hands, twisting the platinum band that still circled my finger. It was a beautiful ring. It was a heavy lie. No, I whispered. Doctor. Marlo paused, her fingers hovering over the keyboard. For how long? I took a breath that rattled in my chest. 18 years. The clicking stopped. The silence that followed was heavy, filled with the judgment I imagined she was passing. Though her face remained neutral, I felt the need to explain, to fill the void with words before the shame suffocated me. My husband, Carter, and I, we have an arrangement, I said, the word tasting like ash. We are parents. We are partners in running a household, but we do not share a bed. We haven't since our son was a toddler. I did not tell her why. I did not tell her about the affair I had 18 years ago, or the way Carter had looked at me when he found out, like I was a structural failure in a building he owned. I did not tell her that we performed the role of the happy couple at dinner parties and school fundraisers, holding hands exactly when required, only to return home and retreat to separate corners of the house like strangers sharing a lease. Doctor. Marlo nodded once, accepting the information as data rather than tragedy. I see. Let's proceed with the ultrasound. I want to check on that pelvic pain you mentioned. The room dimmed. I lay back, staring at the ceiling tiles, counting the little dots to keep my mind from drifting to the humiliation of my reality. The machine hummed, a low vibration that set my teeth on edge. Doctor. Marlo moved the wand, her eyes scanning the monitor. Minutes passed. Too many minutes. The rhythmic swooshing of the machine was the only sound. Until it wasn't. Doctor. Marlo stopped moving her hand. She leaned closer to the screen, squinting. Lucy, she said, her tone different now, sharper. Have you had any uterine surgeries in the past? Perhaps before your son was born? I frowned, lifting my head slightly. No, just the C-section with Mason. That's it. I am looking at the lining here, she said, pointing to a gray smear on the monitor that meant nothing to me. There is significant scarring, not from a C-section. This looks like scar tissue consistent with a dilation and curettage, or perhaps an ablation, but it is old, very old. I shook my head, confusion clouding my vision. You must be mistaken. I have never had a D&C. I have never had an abortion or a miscarriage that required surgery. I have never been under the knife for anything other than childbirth. Doctor. Marlo turned on the lights, blinding me for a second. She looked at me with a mixture of concern and professional skepticism. The body keeps records, Lucy. Even when we do not, this scarring is not naturally occurring. It is the result of a medical intervention. Are you certain there is nothing you have forgotten? A traumatic event? An emergency procedure? I think I would remember if someone operated on my insides, I snapped. Defensive now, I pulled the paper gown tighter around me. There is nothing. She printed out a sheet of paper and handed it to me. It was just a grainy image, but she circled a dark patch with a red pen. I recommend you request your full medical history from your previous providers. Sometimes, especially in emergency situations, details get lost in the trauma, but this, she tapped the paper, this is real. I left the clinic in a daze. The Florida heat hit me like a physical blow the moment I stepped outside, thick and suffocating. I walked to my car, my heels clicking on the asphalt. The doctor's words replaying in my mind. The body keeps records. I sat in the driver's seat of my SUV, blasting the air conditioning, but I could not cool down. My hands were shaking. I gripped the steering wheel, staring at the dashboard clock. It was 2:30 in the afternoon. Why would she say that? I had a memory like a steel trap. I remembered the exact date Carter stopped touching me. I remembered the color of the shirt the man I had the affair with was wearing the day I ended it. I remembered everything. And then, a fragment of a memory dislodged itself from the back of my mind. It was 18 years ago, a Tuesday. No, a Thursday. I had been spiraling, overwhelmed by the guilt of the affair and the Cold War that had just begun in my house. I had taken a sedative prescribed by my general practitioner to help me sleep, but I had reacted badly. I remembered the room spinning. I remembered hitting the floor. I remembered Carter lifting me up. His face was not worried. It was determined. He had driven me to the emergency room. I remembered the lights of the hospital hallway rushing overhead. I remembered the IV needle going into my arm. And then, blackness. I had woken up the next morning in a hospital bed, groggy and sore, and Carter told me I had suffered a severe reaction, that they had to stabilize me. I had been discharged a few hours later. I never questioned it. I was too busy trying to salvage my marriage, too busy trying to be the perfect, repentant wife. My heart began to hammer against my ribs. I pulled my phone out of my purse. My fingers fumbled as I opened the browser and navigated to the patient portal for the regional hospital network. We had been in the same system for 20 years. Everything was digitized now. I typed in my username. I had to reset the password because I had not logged in for 6 months. The wait for the verification code felt like an eternity. Finally, the screen loaded. I scrolled back, past the flu shots, past Mason's broken arm when he was 10, past the annual checkups. I scrolled back to the year 2008. There it was, an emergency room visit. October 14th. I clicked on the details. The medical jargon was dense, but I scanned through the billing codes until my eyes landed on a line item that made the world stop spinning. Surgical procedure. Uterine evacuation. I stopped breathing. That was not a reaction to a sedative. That was a termination. I scrolled down further, my vision blurring. Under the section for patient consent, there was a digital note attached to the file. Patient incapacitated/sedated. Consent for emergency procedure provided by spouse/proxy. Signed, Carter White. I dropped the phone into my lap. The silence inside the car was deafening, louder than the traffic on the highway, louder than the air conditioner blasting at full force. It was not a mistake, Doctor. Marlo was right. My body had a scar because someone had cut into me. But it wasn't just surgery. It was a theft. 18 years ago, on the night I thought I was being treated for a panic attack, I had been pregnant, and Carter had known. He had not just known, he had made a decision. He had signed his name on a piece of paper and authorized a doctor to remove a child I did not even know existed. He had come home the next day, stone-faced, and continued his punishment of silence, acting as if his only burden was my infidelity. But all this time, He had been carrying a secret that outweighed my sin 1,000 times over. He hadn't just stopped touching me. He had reached inside me, erased a life, and then locked the truth away behind a signature I was never meant to see. I looked at my hands again. They looked the same as they had 10 minutes ago. But they felt different. They felt like the hands of a woman who had been asleep for 2 decades and had just woken up in a burning house. I put the car in gear. I was not going home to cry. I was going home to look my husband in the eye, and for the first time in 18 years, I wasn't afraid of his silence. I was afraid of what I was going to do to break it. To understand the woman who sat in that car in 2026, you have to understand the woman who lived in 2008. Back then, I was the communications manager for the internal branch of Seabrook Community Credit Union. It was a job that required a lot of smiling, a lot of emails about corporate synergy, and a lot of ignoring the fact that my soul was slowly leaking out of my ears. My husband, Carter, was an operations engineer at Northline Components. If my job was about spinning perception, his was about absolute, measurable function. We lived in a beige 2-story house in a subdivision where the homeowners association measured the length of your grass with a ruler. We had a 4-year-old son, Mason, who was the sun around which our entire scheduled universe revolved. To the neighbors, we were the poster family for the American dream. We paid our taxes on time. We recycled. We never raised our voices after 9 at night. But inside that house, we were suffocating. It was not a violent suffocation. There was no screaming, no throwing of plates. It was a quiet, creeping lack of oxygen. Carter was a good man in the way a sturdy support beam is good. He was reliable. He was present. He fixed the leaky faucet before I even knew it was dripping. But he was dry. He was so incredibly dry. Our conversations had become logistical exchanges. We talked about mortgage rates. We talked about Mason's preschool tuition. We talked about the grocery list. We never talked about us. When I tried to tell him about a book I read or a strange dream I had, he would nod and check his watch, his mind already moving to the next task on his mental spreadsheet. I was lonely, but I was lonely in a room full of people, which is the specific kind of loneliness that drives you insane. Then I met Adrian Cole. Adrian was a contractor brought in to redesign our customer experience strategy. He was not more handsome than Carter, but he possessed a terrifying, intense focus. When he looked at me, he did not see a mother of a 4-year-old or a mid-level manager. He saw a woman. He asked me questions that had nothing to do with deadlines. He asked me what I wanted to be when I was 10. He asked me why I took my coffee with 3 sugars. He remembered the answers. It started innocently enough, or so I told myself. It began with lunch in the cafeteria, debating the merits of different marketing fonts. Then it became coffee runs that lasted 20 minutes instead of 10. Then it became text messages sent at 7 in the evening. Just jokes, just observations, just friends. I told myself I was in control. I told myself that enjoying the attention of another man was not a crime, just a survival mechanism to get through the gray monotony of my marriage. I did not blame Carter for my unhappiness. That would have been too easy. I blamed the suburbs. I blamed the routine. But the ugly truth was that I was addicted to the feeling of being admired. I liked the way Adrian's eyes followed me when I stood up to leave a conference room. It made me feel like I had a pulse again. I drew lines in the sand, and then I stepped over them, and then I drew new lines. I told myself I would stop before it got physical. Then I told myself I would stop before it got emotional. I was lying to myself with the proficiency of a career politician. It came to a head on a humid Saturday in late September. Carter was supposed to be taking Mason to a birthday party at a bounce house, a chaotic event that would consume the entire afternoon. I told Carter I had a mandatory regional workshop in Tampa. I even printed out a fake itinerary on company letterhead, leaving it on the kitchen counter where he could see it. I did not go to a workshop. I drove across the bridge to St. Petersburg to meet Adrian. There was an outdoor art festival along the waterfront. The sky was a brilliant, painful blue, and the air smelled of salt water and fried dough. I remember wearing a sundress I had bought specifically for that day. hiding the receipt so Carter wouldn't ask why I needed new clothes for a business meeting. Walking with Adrian felt like stepping into a different life. We walked past booths of watercolor paintings and handmade jewelry. We drank iced tea and laughed at things that were not even funny. For 3 hours. I was not Lucy the wife or Lucy the mother. I was just Lucy. I felt light, untethered, and reckless. We stopped near the marina to look at a sculpture made of twisted copper. The wind was whipping off the bay, tangling my hair. Adrian stepped closer to me, breaking the barrier of personal space we had maintained in the office. He reached out and took my hand. His palm was warm, his fingers interlaced with mine. It was such a small gesture, but the electric shock of it went straight to my stomach. I did not pull away. I squeezed back. I looked up at him, smiling, ready to lean into whatever came next, ready to be the woman who took what she wanted. And then, the world stopped. "Mom?" The voice was small, high-pitched, and confused. It cut through the noise of the crowd like a razor blade. I froze. My blood turned to ice in my veins. I knew that voice better than my own heartbeat. I turned my head slowly, praying to a god I had been ignoring for months that I was hallucinating. 10 feet away, standing near a vendor selling pretzels, was Mason. He was holding a half-empty cup of soda, his other hand clutching a superhero action figure. He was wearing his favorite blue t-shirt, the one with the dinosaur on it. His eyes were wide, staring at my hand, the hand that was currently locked in Adrian's grip. And standing next to him, holding a napkin, was Carter. Carter was not looking at Mason. He was looking at me. He was looking at Adrian. He was looking at our joined hands. The expression on his face was not anger. If he had screamed, if he had charged at us, I might have known what to do. I could have fought anger, but Carter just looked at me with a terrifying, absolute clarity. It was the look of a man who was watching a building collapse and realizing he was still inside it. I ripped my hand away from Adrian as if I had been burned, but the damage was done. The timestamp on my marriage had just expired. The air between us crystallized, heavy and unbreathable. "Mommy?" Mason said again, his voice trembling slightly. "Why are you holding that man's hand?" I opened my mouth, but no sound came out. I had prepared 1,000 excuses for 1,000 scenarios, but I had nothing for this. I stood there in my new dress, under the beautiful blue sky, and watched my life disintegrate in real time. Carter did not say a word. He just placed a hand on Mason's shoulder, a gesture of protection, shielding our son from the radioactive fallout of his mother's selfishness. That silence was the loudest thing I had ever heard. It was the beginning of the end, though I did not know yet just how long the end would take. The drive home from St. Petersburg was a lesson in how loud silence could be. I sat in the passenger seat, my hands clamped between my knees, staring out the window at the passing pylons of the Sunshine Skyway Bridge. The yellow lines on the road blurred into a continuous stream, a dizzying ribbon that made me want to tuck my head between my legs and scream. But I did not scream. I did not make a sound. I barely breathed. In the back seat, Mason was humming a song from a cartoon. He was 4 years old. He did not understand the concept of infidelity or the nuances of betrayal. He only knew that the afternoon had ended abruptly, that Mommy looked sick, and that Daddy was driving with both hands on the wheel at 10 and 2. His knuckles white as bone. Carter did not look at me, not once. He checked his mirrors. He signaled his lane changes. He adjusted the air conditioning vent so it blew directly onto his face. He was operating the vehicle with the same precise mechanical efficiency he applied to the machines at Northline Components. If he had screamed, if he had slammed his hand against the dashboard, if he had called me a whore, I would have known how to react. I could have cried. I could have defended myself. I could have begged. But you cannot beg a wall. You cannot argue with a vacuum. His silence was not just an absence of noise. It was a weapon. It was a heavy, suffocating blanket that he had draped over the car, trapping us all underneath it. When we pulled into the driveway, The garage door opened with its usual mechanical groan. It sounded like a judgment. Carter turned off the ignition. The sudden cut of the engine left a ringing in my ears. "Mason," Carter said. His voice was steady. It was the same voice he used to order pizza. "Go upstairs and wash your hands. Then you can play with your train set until dinner." Mason scrambled out of his car seat, oblivious to the fact that the atmosphere in the car was toxic enough to kill small animals. "Okay, Daddy." I watched our son run inside, his footsteps thumping on the hardwood floor of the entryway. Then the front door closed, and we were alone in the garage. The heat of the car engine ticked as it cooled. "Carter," I started, my voice cracking. I sounded pathetic. "Please, let me explain." Carter unbuckled his seatbelt. He did not look at me. "Inside? Kitchen." He got out of the car and walked into the house without waiting to see if I followed. I sat there for a moment, trembling. I felt like a child who had broken a vase, but 1,000 times worse. I had broken the foundation of the house itself. I walked into the kitchen. Carter was sitting at the small round table we used for breakfast. He had not turned on the overhead lights, so the room was lit only by the graying afternoon sun filtering through the blinds. He sat with his hands folded on the table in front of him, perfectly still. He looked like he was about to interview a candidate for a job he did not want to fill. I stood by the sink, gripping the edge of the granite counter to keep my legs from giving out. "Sit down," he said. I pulled out a chair and sat. The wood scraped against the floor, a harsh, screeching sound that made me wince. Carter looked at me. His eyes were dry. There was no redness, no moisture, just a flat, unyielding assessment. "How long?" he asked. 2 words, no adjectives, no emotional qualifiers. I swallowed hard. "Carter, it was not what you think. How long? Lucy?" He repeated the question with the exact same inflection. He was not asking for a story. He was asking for data. 3 months, I whispered. But we didn't sleep together. We just talked. It was emotional. I was lonely. And he listened. And I let it get out of hand. I swear to you. Carter, I never took him to a hotel. I never brought him here. You let him hold your hand in public. Carter said. In front of my son. The way he said my son instead of our son hit me like a physical slap. He had already begun the separation of assets in his mind. "I am sorry," I choked out. "I am so sorry. I will call him right now. I will end it. I will quit my job if I have to. I will do anything." Carter raised a hand to stop me. He looked bored. That was the most terrifying part. He looked utterly bored by my apology, as if he had already read the transcript and found it lacking. "I have been thinking on the drive home," he said. "We have 2 choices, and I need you to listen very carefully because I am only going to say this once." He held up one finger. "Choice number 1, we divorce. I will file for full custody of Mason on the grounds of your instability and infidelity. I have a very good lawyer who specializes in father's rights. Given that you were seen publicly canoodling with another man while neglecting your family, I will likely win. You will leave this house. You will see Mason every other weekend. If that, you will start over with half of your savings and a ruined reputation." I opened my mouth to protest, to say that no court would take a mother away from her child for holding hands, but the look in his eyes stopped me. He believed he would win. And Carter never entered a fight he had not already calculated he could win. He held up a second finger. "Choice number 2, we stay married." Hope flared in my chest, bright and desperate. "Yes," I said quickly. "Yes, we stay married. We fix this." "Let me finish," he said, his voice cutting through my hope like a scythe. "We stay married. We live in this house. We raise Mason together, to the outside world, to the neighbors, to your parents, to my parents, to the school. We are a happy, functioning couple. We go to parties. We take family photos. We pay the bills." He leaned forward slightly. "But inside this house, we are done. You are not my wife. You are my roommate. You are the mother of my child. And that is all. I will move into the guest room tonight. We will not share a bed. We will not share a life beyond what is necessary for Mason. You will never ask me for affection again. You will never ask me where I go or who I see. Though I assure you, unlike you, I take my vows seriously. I stared at him. The air in the kitchen felt thin, as if he had sucked all the oxygen out of the room. Carter, you can't mean that. You want us to live like strangers? For how long? Until Mason is 18, he said. Until he goes to college. Then we can reassess. 18 years? I whispered. The number hung in the air, vast and impossible. You are sentencing us to 18 years of prison? No, Carter said, standing up. He smoothed the front of his polo shirt. I am sentencing you to the consequences of your actions. I am protecting my son from a broken home. You are the one who broke it. Lucy, I am just putting duct tape over the cracks so he doesn't cut his feet. I can't live like that, I said, tears finally spilling over. Carter, please, yell at me, punish me, but don't shut me out. I love you. Do not say that, he said. If you loved me, you would not have needed someone else to tell you that you were special. He walked over to the refrigerator and opened it. He took out a bottle of water. He unscrewed the cap and took a drink, his throat working as he swallowed. It was such a normal action, so domestic, yet it felt miles away. So, he said, capping the bottle. Choice 1 or choice 2? I looked at him. I looked at the magnets on the fridge holding up Mason's drawings. I thought about Mason upstairs, playing with his trains, safe in his bubble. I thought about losing him. I thought about living in a shitty apartment, seeing my son only on alternate Saturdays, knowing I had destroyed his world. Choice 2, I said. My voice was dead. Good, Carter said. I will move my things now. He walked past me out of the kitchen. He did not brush against my shoulder. He did not look back. That night, I lay in our king-sized bed alone. The space next to me was empty. The sheets were cold. I could hear Carter moving around in the guest room down the hall. I heard the click of his door closing. I got up and walked down the hallway. I stood outside his door. I raised my hand to knock, to beg, to throw myself at his feet, and promised to spend the rest of my life making it up to him if he would just hold me. I needed to be held. I needed to know that I was not a monster. I turned the handle. It was unlocked. I pushed the door open. Carter was sitting on the edge of the guest bed, reading a magazine. He looked up. He did not look surprised. He looked annoyed. Get out, he said. Carter, please. I sobbed. I stepped into the room. I can't do this. I can't be a roommate. I need you. He stood up and walked over to me. For a second, I thought he was going to hug me. I thought he was going to break. He stopped 2 feet away from me. I told you the rules. If you cannot follow them, we go to choice 1. Why are you doing this? I cried. Why do you hate me this much? I don't hate you, he said. And that was the worst part. His voice was devoid of passion. I am indifferent to you. You made yourself a stranger to me the moment you let another man touch you. I am just treating you accordingly. He reached out and took the doorknob. Don't make me regret not divorcing you. Lucy, he said. He closed the door in my face. The latch clicked. I stood in the hallway, staring at the white-painted wood. I placed my palm against the door. It was cool to the touch, and in that moment, I understood the true nature of my sentence. It wasn't about money. It wasn't about the house. It was about the skin. I was 28 years old. I was young. I was alive. And I had just agreed to never be touched again. I had agreed to become a ghost in my own life. Visible but intangible. Present but unfelt. I walked back to the master bedroom, the silence of the house roaring in my ears. I climbed into the big, empty bed and pulled the duvet up to my chin. I shivered. But the cold wasn't coming from the air conditioning. It was coming from the future. 18 years of winter had just begun. The years that followed were not measured in hours or days, but in layers of ice. If you looked at our calendar, you would see a perfectly normal life. We had anniversaries. We had birthdays. We had parent-teacher conferences. We had vacations to the Outer Banks where we stood on the sand and smiled for the camera. The wind whipping our hair, looking for all the world like a unit that belonged together. But if you looked closer, if you zoomed in on the pixels of those photographs, you would see the truth. Carter's hand on my waist was never a caress. It was a prop placement. It had the weight and warmth of a mannequin's grip. He stood next to me. Not because he wanted to be near me, but because the composition of the image required it. We became masters of the performance. Carter would drive us to his company holiday parties at Northline Components, and the moment we stepped out of the car, he would activate a version of himself I had not seen since before the affair. He would chuckle at my jokes. He would place a hand on the small of my back to guide me through a crowd. He would say things like, "Lucy handles all that. She is the organizer in the family," with a tone of fond exasperation. Then, the drive home. The moment the car doors slammed shut, the performance ended. The silence would rush back in, louder than the engine. He would drive with that same terrifying focus, staring straight ahead, while I picked at the sequins on my dress and watched the streetlights blur past. We would walk into the house, and he would go straight to the guest room, which he now called his study to guests, and close the door. Inside our home, we developed a language of avoidance. We stopped speaking sentences. We communicated via post-it notes stuck to the stainless steel refrigerator. Mason has soccer practice at 4 o'clock. We are out of milk. The plumber is coming on Tuesday. Never please, never thank you, never love. Carter, just data, cold, hard data. I tried to break the ice. God, I tried. For the first 2 years, I launched a campaign of domestic affection. I cooked his favorite meals, pot roast with extra carrots, lasagna with the expensive ricotta. I would set the table with candles. He would come home, sit down, eat the food quickly, and say, "The meat is good, thank you." Then he would wash his own plate and leave the room. I bought him gifts, a new watch for his birthday, tickets to a baseball game. He would accept them with a polite nod, the kind you give a bank teller who hands you a receipt. "I appreciate the thought," he would say. He never wore the watch. He gave the tickets to a colleague. Eventually, the rejection became too heavy to carry, so I stopped trying. I matched his temperature. I became a roommate. We moved around each other in the kitchen like two planets in different orbits, careful never to collide. The tragedy was Mason. Children are like sponges. They absorb the atmosphere of a house even when nothing is said. Mason grew up in a home that was quiet, clean, and utterly devoid of warmth. He learned early on that asking questions was dangerous. When he was 6, he asked why Daddy didn't sleep with Mommy. I saw Carter stiffen, saw the way he looked at Mason with a sudden, sharp intensity. "Mommy snores." Carter had lied, his voice flat. Mason never asked again. He learned to read the tension in our shoulders. He became a good kid, quiet, studious, self-contained. He kept his head down and his grades up, trying to be as low maintenance as possible, as if he sensed that his family was a fragile glass sculpture that would shatter if he made a sudden noise. But there was one person who brought noise into our mausoleum: Trent Harlow. Trent had been Carter's best friend since their days at Georgia Tech. He had been the best man at our wedding, standing beside Carter with a grin that was too wide and a tuxedo that fit a little too tightly. After the incident, as I called it in my head, Trent started coming around more often. He was everything Carter was not. He was loud. He took up space. He drove a flashy red convertible and wore cologne that lingered in the hallway for hours after he left. He would burst into our house on a Sunday afternoon, carrying a 6-pack of beer and a new video game for Mason. "Hey, little man," he would shout, tousling Mason's hair. "Look what Uncle Trent got for you." Carter tolerated him. In fact, Trent was the only person who could make Carter look relaxed. They would sit on the back patio, drinking beer and talking about sports or the stock market. And for a moment, Carter would look like the man I used to know. But whenever Trent looked at me, my skin crawled. It wasn't that he was inappropriate. He never said anything untoward. He was perfectly polite. "Hello, Lucy. You look nice today. House looks great." But his eyes were always measuring me. He would watch me pour coffee, watch me walk across the living room, watch me interact with Mason. It wasn't a look of desire. It was a look of assessment. It felt clinical, predatory. There was something about his voice, a certain cadence, a specific laugh, that set off a warning bell deep in my brain. It was a feeling of déjà vu, but darker, every time he was near. I felt a wave of nausea, a flash of a memory I couldn't quite reach. It was like trying to remember a nightmare you had 5 years ago. You don't recall the monsters, but you remember the fear. I would busy myself in the kitchen just to avoid being in the same room as him. "You don't like Trent," Carter observed once, typically observant. "He is loud," I said, scrubbing a pot harder than necessary, "and he looks at me like I am a specimen." Carter didn't defend his friend. He just shrugged. "He has been a good friend to me. That is all that matters." The years ground on. Mason turned 10, then 13, then 16. The house grew emptier even as we all still lived in it. Mason spent more time at the library, at friends' houses, anywhere but home. I didn't blame him. Who wants to live in a funeral parlor? Then came the day Mason left for college. He had been accepted to the University of Georgia, his father's alma mater. We drove him up to Athens in 2 cars because we had so much luggage. The campus was vibrant, full of life and leaves turning gold in the autumn sun. We moved him into his dorm. I made his bed, smoothing the sheets, trying not to cry. This boy was the only thing that had given me a purpose for 18 years. He was the buffer zone between Carter and me. When we said goodbye in the parking lot, Mason hugged me tight. He was taller than me now, broad-shouldered and handsome, but his eyes were still the eyes of that scared 4-year-old holding a soda cup. "Bye, Mom," he said. Just take care." He hugged Carter. It was a brief, manly embrace. "Thanks for everything, Dad." "Study hard," Carter said. "Make good choices." We watched him walk away toward the brick dorm buildings. He didn't look back. The drive home was the longest of my life, without Mason in the back seat. There was no reason to pretend. The silence in the car was absolute. It wasn't just quiet. It was final. When we got home, Carter walked into the kitchen and poured himself a glass of water. He looked at me, and for the first time, I saw a change in his face. The mask of the dutiful father was slipping. Underneath, there was nothing but a vast, icy fatigue. "He is gone," Carter said. It wasn't a question. "Yes," I said. "He is gone." "Good," Carter said. "He is safe now." He walked past me, heading for his study. He didn't say good night. He didn't ask what was for dinner. He closed the door, and the click of the latch sounded like a prison gate slamming shut. I stood in the empty kitchen, surrounded by the high-end appliances and the granite countertops we had worked so hard to pay for. I realized then that I had been wrong about time. People tell you that time heals all wounds, that it softens the sharp edges of pain. They are liars. Time does not heal. Time is just a freezer. It takes the pain, the anger, and the resentment, and it freezes them solid. It preserves them perfectly. Carter hadn't forgiven me. He hadn't moved on. He had just put his hatred on ice, waiting for the moment when he no longer had to protect his son from the blast radius. Now, the shield was gone, and I was alone in the house with a man who had been holding his breath for 18 years, waiting to exhale. Time moves differently when you are waiting for a bomb to go off. For years, I had been tiptoeing around the fuse, thinking if I walked softly enough, the explosion would never come. But fuses have a way of burning down regardless of how quiet you are. Mason was 22 years old now. He had grown into a man who looked startlingly like Carter, with the same square jaw and the same ability to wear a suit as if it were armor. He had graduated, started a job at a logistics firm in Atlanta, and most significantly, he had met someone. Her name was Olivia Grant. Olivia was a forensic accountant, a profession that suited her perfectly. She was calm, practical, and possessed a terrifying ability to read the temperature of a room the moment she walked into it. She did not miss details. When she looked at you, you felt like she was scanning your receipts for discrepancies. We were at a steakhouse in downtown Tampa, the kind of place with dark wood paneling and waiters who scraped crumbs off the table with little silver blades. It was supposed to be a celebration. Mason had called us earlier in the week, his voice tight with nerves, asking us to drive up for dinner because he had news. We all knew what the news was. The diamond ring on Olivia's finger, which she was trying politely not to flash under the chandelier light, was a dead giveaway. The dinner started with the usual choreography. Carter played the role of the benevolent patriarch, ordering a bottle of Cabernet that cost $200 and asking Olivia polite questions about her firm. I played the doting mother, smiling until my cheeks ached, asking about wedding dates and floral arrangements. "We are thinking next spring," Olivia said, her hand resting on Mason's forearm. "Ideally before tax season gets crazy." "That sounds sensible," Carter said, swirling his wine. "Spring is a good time for new beginnings." He smiled at me. It was his party smile, the one that didn't reach his eyes. He reached over and patted my hand on the tablecloth. "Right, Lucy. We got married in April, didn't we?" "May," I corrected him, keeping my hand still under his cold palm. "It was May." Olivia looked at us, her eyes softening. She took a sip of her water and smiled. "You know, Mason talks about you two all the time. He says he wants what you have. It is rare to see a couple married for 25 years who still look at each other the way you do, like you are newlyweds." The air left my lungs. The irony was so sharp it felt like I had swallowed a piece of glass. I looked at Carter. He didn't blink. He just nodded, accepting the compliment as if it were a factual statement about the weather. "We are very lucky," Carter said. I felt a hysterical laugh bubbling up in my throat. I grabbed my water glass and drank to drown it. Lucky. We were not lucky. We were inmates in the same cell, beside me. Mason went rigid. He had been quiet for most of the meal, letting Olivia handle the conversation. But now, he put his knife and fork down on his plate. The clatter of silverware against china was loud in the hushed restaurant. "Stop it," Mason said. It was not a shout, but it was forceful enough that the couple at the next table glanced over. Carter looked at him, his eyebrows raising slightly. "Excuse me?" Mason turned to Olivia. "They are lying. Liv, they don't look at each other like newlyweds. They look at each other like hostage negotiators." "Mason," I hissed, my heart hammering against my ribs. "Not here." "Yes, here," Mason said, his voice rising. He looked at me, then at Carter. "I am done. Mom, I am 22. I am getting married. I am starting my own life, and I refuse to drag this fake, frozen performance into my marriage. I don't want to pretend anymore." Olivia looked between us, her accountant's brain rapidly reevaluating the data. She didn't look shocked. She looked like she was finally seeing the numbers add up. Carter picked up his wine glass. His hand was perfectly steady. "Mason, you are making a scene. We will discuss this at home." "We don't have a home," Mason snapped. "We have a house where two people avoid each other in the hallway. Do you think I didn't know? Do you think I didn't notice that you haven't slept in the same room since I was 4? Do you think I didn't hear the silence?" He leaned across the table, staring at his father. "Tell me the truth. Dad, right now, in front of Olivia, are you happy?" The question hung over the table, heavy and suffocating. Carter stared at his son. For a second, I saw the mask slip. I saw the exhaustion, the deep, gray fatigue of a man who has been carrying a boulder for 2 decades. But then the wall slammed back down. "Eat your steak, Mason," Carter said. "It is getting cold." That command, that dismissal of Mason's pain as something less important than the temperature of meat, was the spark that blew up the powder keg. Mason stood up. His chair scraped violently against the floor. "No, I am not eating, and neither are you." He looked down at Carter. "Here is how it is going to work. You two are going to stop this charade. You are going to get a divorce. You are going to set each other free, because if you don't, I am going to tell everyone. I will tell Grandma. I will tell the aunts. I will tell the cousins at the reunion next month. I will tell them that my parents are a sham." My blood ran cold. It wasn't the scandal I feared. People get divorced all the time. It was the fear that if the secret was out, if the necessity of the performance was gone, Carter would have no reason to stay near me at all. He would vanish. He would finally execute the sentence he had handed down 18 years ago. "Mason, please," I begged, reaching for his arm. "Sit down. We can talk about this." "I am done talking," Mason said. He took Olivia's hand. "Come on, Liv. We are leaving." Olivia stood up. She looked at me, and there was no pity in her eyes, only a sharp, sad clarity. "Thank you for dinner, Mr. and Mrs. White. The wine was lovely." They walked out. I watched my son's back retreat through the restaurant, past the dessert cart, past the host stand, and out the door. I sat there, frozen. The waiter arrived a moment later, oblivious. "Is everything all right? Can I clear those plates?" "Check, please," Carter said. The drive back to the hotel was silent. But it was a different kind of silence than usual. It wasn't the silence of avoidance. It was the silence of a structure that has finally collapsed. When we got to the hotel room, Carter sat on the edge of the bed and took off his shoes. He lined them up perfectly parallel to the wall. "He is going to do it," I said, my voice trembling. "He is going to tell everyone." Carter didn't look up. "He might." "What are we going to do?" I asked. "Carter, 18 years. We did this for 18 years for him, and now he hates us for it." Carter stood up and unbuttoned his cuffs. He walked to the window and looked out at the city lights of Tampa. "He doesn't hate us, Lucy. He just grew up. We didn't—" I walked over to him. I stood close enough to smell his aftershave, the same scent he had worn since our wedding day. "How much longer, Carter? How much longer do we have to do this?" He turned to look at me. The street lamp outside cast half his face in shadow. "Until we can't act anymore, and I think tonight was the final curtain." I looked into his eyes and realized something that terrified me more than his anger ever had. He wasn't mad. He wasn't vengeful. He was just tired. He was so incredibly tired. His hate for me had burned itself out years ago, leaving only a hollow shell of obligation. "I am going to sleep," he said. "We will drive back in the morning." He went to the second bed in the hotel room and lay down. Turning his back to me, I lay in the dark, listening to his breathing. My mind was racing, trying to figure out how to navigate this new reality where our son was the enemy of our secret. But as I lay there, a different kind of problem began to announce itself. It started as a dull ache in my lower abdomen. I shifted, trying to get comfortable. I thought it was just stress. The confrontation at dinner had been visceral. My body was reacting to the adrenaline crash. But the ache didn't fade. It sharpened. It felt deep, heavy, and wrong. It felt like a cramp. But I was 50 years old. I had gone through menopause 2 years ago. I shouldn't be having cramps. The pain twisted, a sharp, hot knife turning inside me. I bit my lip to keep from making a sound. I would not wake Carter. I would not give him one more thing to be annoyed about. I curled into a ball, my hands pressing against my stomach. It felt like something was waking up inside me. Something old and scarred. I didn't know it then. Lying in that hotel room while my husband slept 3 feet away. But the family drama Mason had just started was nothing compared to the storm that was brewing in my own cells. The mask had fallen off our marriage tonight, but tomorrow, the mask was going to be ripped off my own history. The pain pulsed again, Sharper this time. It felt like a reminder. The body keeps records, the doctor would say later, and my body was about to read the minutes of the meeting aloud. I returned to Dr. Marlowe's clinic 3 days later. This time, I did not wear the paper gown. I sat in the chair across from her desk, fully dressed in a navy blazer, clutching a manila envelope so tightly my knuckles were white. Inside was the printout from the patient portal, a single sheet of paper that had turned my entire history into a lie. Doctor. Marlowe took the paper. She adjusted her glasses and read it in silence. The air conditioner hummed, a low drone that sounded like a swarm of bees in my head. "This confirms the scarring," she said, her voice devoid of the clinical detachment she usually wore. She looked up at me, and her eyes were fierce. "Lucy, you did not imagine the pain. And you did not imagine the violation. Someone made a choice for your body without your voice being in the room." I felt a shiver run down my spine, cold and sharp. "I went to the hospital records department this morning," I told her, my voice trembling. "I needed to see the original. I needed to see the wet ink." I pulled out the second document. It was a photocopy of a consent form from 18 years ago, stamped with the official seal of the hospital archives. The date was October 14th, 2008. The procedure listed was dilation and curettage/therapeutic termination. And there, at the bottom, on the line marked legal guardian/spouse proxy, was a signature I had seen on birthday cards, mortgage papers, and tax returns for 2 decades. Carter White. "He signed it," I whispered. "He authorized them to operate on me while I was unconscious." "Doctor." Marlowe pushed the paper back to me gently. "Medically, if you were sedated and there was a complication, the next of kin has the power to make decisions. But a termination? Unless your life was in immediate danger. That is a gray area so dark, I cannot even see the bottom of it. This was not just a medical decision. Lucy, this was a removal." I drove home with the envelope on the passenger seat. It felt radioactive. The anger that had been building inside me for days was no longer a fire. It was a cold, hard stone in my throat. I did not cry. I was past crying. I was in a place beyond sadness. A place where the only thing that mattered was the truth. When I entered the house, it was quiet. Mason was gone, back in Atlanta with Olivia, leaving the wreckage of our family dinner behind him. Carter was in his study. The door was closed. As always, I did not knock. I threw the door open. It hit the wall with a loud crack. Carter was sitting at his mahogany desk, reviewing blueprints for a new assembly line. He looked up, startled, his pen hovering over the paper. When he saw my face, he put the pen down. He did not ask why I had barged in. He knew. The mask he had worn for 18 years finally cracked, revealing the fear underneath. I walked over to the desk and slammed the photocopy down in front of him. The sound was like a gunshot in the small room. "What did you sign?" I asked. My voice was low, dangerous. 18 years ago, October 14th. What did you take from me?" Carter looked at the paper. He did not read it. He stared at his own signature as if it were a snake that was about to bite him. His face went gray, the color draining away until he looked like a corpse. "Lucy," he said, his voice barely a whisper. "You were not supposed to see that." "I was not supposed to know that my husband gutted me while I was sleeping?" I screamed. The control broke. "Tell me, what happened that night?" Carter stood up. He walked to the window, turning his back to me. His shoulders were shaking, for the first time since the affair. For the first time in nearly 2 decades, the robot was malfunctioning. "You were bleeding," he said, speaking to the glass. "The reaction to the sedative caused hemorrhaging. They had to stabilize you. They did an ultrasound." He turned around. His eyes were red, rimmed with a raw, ugly pain I had never seen before. "You were pregnant. Lucy, 7 weeks." The world tilted. I grabbed the edge of the bookshelf to keep from falling. Pregnant. I had been pregnant. And I hadn't known. I stammered. "I didn't know." "I knew," Carter said brutally. The doctor came out and told me. He congratulated me. He asked if we wanted to save the pregnancy while they treated the reaction. He laughed, a dry barking sound. Congratulated me. I did the math. Lucy, we hadn't slept together in 4 months. 4 months, and you were 7 weeks along. The silence that followed was heavy with the ghost of my betrayal. It wasn't yours, I whispered. It wasn't a question. No, Carter said. It wasn't mine. It was his. It was that bastard Adrian's. He walked back to the desk and gripped the edge, leaning forward until his face was inches from mine. Do you have any idea what that felt like? To stand in a hospital hallway, with nurses smiling at me, knowing that my wife was carrying another man's child? It burned me. Lucy, it incinerated everything I had left for you. So you decided to kill it? I asked, horror rising in my throat. I made a choice, Carter shouted. I had to make a choice in 5 minutes. The doctor said the drugs you took might have already damaged the fetus. He said there were risks, but I didn't care about the risks. I cared about Mason. He slammed his hand on the desk. I could not let Mason grow up with a half-sibling who was living proof of his mother's affair. I could not let you walk around this town with a belly that didn't belong to me. I could not let the scandal destroy my son's life before it even started. So you signed, I said, tears finally spilling over. You signed a paper to abort a child. And you never told me. You let me wake up thinking I had just had a bad reaction to a pill. I protected us, Carter said, his voice shaking. I buried the mistake. I signed the consent for the D&C. I told them to do whatever was necessary to clean up the mess. Clean up the mess, I repeated, feeling sick. That was a life, Carter. Even if it wasn't yours, it was part of me. It was a tumor, Carter spat. A malignant tumor that would have killed this family. He sank back into his chair, looking suddenly old and defeated. I saved your reputation, Lucy, and I saved Mason from the truth. You should be thanking me. I looked at him, and I realized that the man sitting in front of me was a stranger. He wasn't just cold, he was ruthless. He had played God because his pride was wounded. Who else knows? I asked. Did you tell anyone? Carter looked away. He hesitated. Who else knows? Carter? Trent, he said. The name hung in the air like a foul smell. Trent? I asked, confused. Why would Trent know? He was with me, Carter said. He rubbed his face with his hands. He was at the house when you collapsed. He helped me carry you to the car. He drove us to the hospital because I was shaking too hard to hold the wheel. Carter looked up at me, and his expression changed. It wasn't the camaraderie of old friends. It was something else. His lip curled slightly. His eyes narrowed. He was there when the doctor told me, Carter said quietly. He was the one who handed me the pen. He told me it was the only way to survive. He stood right next to me while I signed it. I stared at Carter. Trent Harlow? Your best friend? He encouraged you to do this? He isn't my friend, Carter muttered. It was a strange thing to say about a man he had spent every weekend with for 20 years. He is a witness. He knows where the bodies are buried because he helped dig the hole. There was a look of utter revulsion on Carter's face. It wasn't directed at me. It was directed at the memory of Trent. He told me he would handle the hospital staff, Carter continued, his voice hollow. He said he knew people in administration. He said he would make sure the records were sealed tight, and he did. Until you went digging. My mind raced. Trent, the man who always looked at me with those measuring eyes, the man who made my skin crawl. He had been there. He had been the architect of my violation just as much as Carter had. Why do you keep him around? I asked. If you hate him, if you look at him like that, why is he always in our house? Why is he Uncle Trent to Mason? Carter looked at me, and for a second, I saw pure terror in his eyes. Because, he said, you don't push away the man who holds the shovel. Lucy, if he walks away, he might decide to uncover the grave. He reached out and took the paper from the desk. He crumpled it in his fist. "I did what I had to do," Carter said. "Now get out of my office." I backed out of the room. I felt dizzy, but my mind was clearer than it had ever been. The scar on my uterus wasn't just a medical injury, it was a crime scene, and now I knew there were two accomplices. But as I walked down the hallway, thinking about Trent Harlow's smiling face, I realized something else. Carter had said the baby wasn't his because of the timing. He had said, "I was 7 weeks pregnant." I stopped in the middle of the living room. 18 years ago. The timeline. I had been with Adrian for 3 months. Yes, but we had only been intimate once, at the very end. 2 weeks before I was caught. If I was 7 weeks pregnant, the baby couldn't have been Adrian's. My knees gave out, and I sank onto the floor. If it wasn't Adrian's, and Carter swore he hadn't touched me, then who? The memory I had been suppressing. The one that made me hate the smell of rain and the sound of Trent's voice began to claw its way to the surface. The night of the bachelorette party, the night I blacked out, the night Trent drove me home. I put a hand over my mouth to stifle a scream. The horror wasn't over. It was just beginning. And the answer lay in the blood of the son I still had. The phone call that shattered the precarious ceasefire of our lives came at 3 a.m. It was a digital trill that cut through the silence of the bedroom like a siren. Carter picked it up on the first ring. He did not say hello. He just listened, his back stiffening, his hand gripping the receiver so hard I could hear the plastic creak. "We are on our way," he said. He hung up and turned to me. In the darkness, his face was a pale mask of terror. "Mason, there was an accident on the interstate near Savannah." We drove north in a state of suspended animation. The speedometer hovered at 90 miles per hour. But it felt like we were crawling. Carter did not look at me. He did not speak. He just drove with a terrifying, singular focus, as if he could will the car forward with his mind. I sat in the passenger seat, my hands clasped in prayer to a universe I hadn't spoken to in years, begging for the life of the boy who was the only innocent thing in our wreckage of a marriage. When we arrived at the trauma center in Savannah, the air was thick with the smell of antiseptic and old coffee. We found Olivia in the waiting room. She was still wearing her pajamas under a trench coat, her hair pulled back in a severe, messy bun. Her face was the color of paper, but her eyes were dry and sharp. She looked like a general on a battlefield who had just received heavy casualty reports but refused to retreat. "He is alive," she said immediately, stepping forward to catch me before I crumbled. He swerved. A kid, maybe 10 years old, rode a bike right out onto the exit ramp. Mason jerked the wheel to miss him and hit the guardrail. The car flipped. "Is he—" I couldn't finish the sentence. "He is in surgery now," Olivia said, her voice steady. "Internal bleeding, a lacerated spleen, but the neurosurgeon says his brain activity is normal. He's going to make it. Lucy." We sat. The waiting room was a purgatory of vinyl chairs and muted television screens. Carter stood by the window, staring out at the parking lot, his arms crossed over his chest. He looked like a statue made of ice that was slowly beginning to crack under the heat of the situation. An hour later, a surgeon in blue scrubs emerged through the swinging doors. He looked tired. He pulled his mask down, revealing a face etched with the gravity of his job. "Family of Mason White?" he asked. We surged forward. Carter was there in 2 strides. "I am his father," Carter said. "How is he?" "He is stable, but we have a complication regarding his blood volume," the doctor said, flipping through a clipboard. "He lost a significant amount of blood at the scene, and during the splenectomy, we have stabilized the bleeding. But his counts are critically low. We are waiting on a transfer from the blood bank. But they are running a bit behind on his specific type." The doctor looked at us. "We could do a direct donation if one of you is a match. It is faster. Mason is type B negative. It is a relatively rare type." The world stopped. The hum of the vending machine, the squeak of nurses' shoes, the distant wail of an ambulance. It all vanished. I stood frozen. My blood ran cold. colder than the air conditioning, colder than the grave Carter had dug for our marriage. That is not possible, Carter said. His voice was calm, but it had a strange, hollow quality. There must be a mistake on the chart. The doctor frowned. I assure you, Mr. White, we triple-checked. We have to be certain before we transfuse. Your son is B negative. Carter turned to look at me. His eyes were wide, filled with a sudden, dawning horror that had nothing to do with the accident and everything to do with biology. I am O positive, Carter said slowly, articulating every syllable. And Lucy is O positive. It is on her medical chart. I have seen it. He looked back at the doctor. 2 O positives cannot produce a B negative child. It is genetically impossible. The doctor paused. He looked from Carter to me, and then down at the floor. It was the look of a man who had stumbled into a domestic tragedy while trying to fix a spleen. Well, he said, his voice dropping to a diplomatic murmur. Genetics can be complex. Mutations happen, or perhaps there is an error in your own typing records. There is no error, Carter whispered. He looked at me. The ice in his eyes didn't melt. It shattered. For 18 years. This man had hated me for an emotional betrayal. He had punished me for holding hands. He had forced me to live as a roommate because he thought I had disrespected our vows. But through all of it, he had clung to one truth. Mason was his son. Mason was the one thing he had kept pure. Mason was the reason he had stayed. And now, in a brightly lit hospital corridor, a simple letter, B, had taken that away from him. Lucy, Carter said. It wasn't a question. It was a devastation. Before I could answer, before I could even try to invent a lie that would survive the harsh light of science, Olivia stepped forward. I am B negative, she said clearly. We all turned to look at her. She was rolling up the sleeve of her trench coat. Extending her arm to the doctor, her face was set in stone. She knew. I could see it in her eyes. She had done the math before the doctor even finished the sentence. She worked with numbers for a living. She knew when an equation didn't balance. Take my blood, Olivia said. He needs it now. We can discuss the genealogy later, the doctor nodded, relieved to have a medical solution to a personal disaster. Right, come with me. Miss Grant, Olivia followed him, but before she passed through the doors, she looked back at me. It was a look of profound disappointment. She didn't say anything, but she didn't have to. She was saving my son's life, but she was also condemning my lie. The next 2 hours were an agony I cannot describe. Carter and I sat in the waiting room, separated by 4 empty chairs. He did not look at me. He sat with his head in his hands, staring at the linoleum floor. I could see his shoulders rising and falling, not with sobs, but with the heavy, labored breathing of a man who is suffocating. Finally, a nurse came to tell us that Mason was out of surgery and in the ICU. The transfusion had worked. He was waking up. We walked to the ICU in silence. The corridor felt like a tunnel closing in on us. When we reached the glass wall of Mason's room, we stopped. Mason was lying in the bed, hooked up to monitors that beeped with a steady, reassuring rhythm. He looked pale, bruised, and small. A bandage was wrapped around his head. Olivia was sitting in a chair next to the bed, holding his hand, a bandage on her own arm where they had drawn the blood. Carter stood looking through the glass. He placed his hand on the pane. His fingers splayed out. He looked at the boy he had raised, the boy he had taught to throw a baseball, the boy he had stayed in a loveless marriage to protect. Lucy, he said. His voice was so quiet, I almost didn't hear it over the hum of the hospital machinery. He didn't turn to face me. He just kept looking at Mason. Is he my son? The question hung there, suspended in the sterile air. I looked at Carter's back. I looked at the gray hairs on his head, the slump of his shoulders. I thought about the 18 years of coldness, the abortion he had forced, the separate bedrooms. I thought about the fact that he had sacrificed his own happiness to raise this boy. I wanted to lie. I wanted to say yes. I wanted to tell him that biology was wrong, that love made a father, not blood. Yes, I said. But the word came out wrong. It didn't sound like a fact. It sounded like a plea. It sounded like a beg. It sounded like a woman trying to hold back the ocean with a paper shield. Carter didn't move. He didn't nod. He just let his hand slide down the glass, leaving a smudge. Inside the room, Mason stirred. His eyes fluttered open. He looked around, confused for a moment, and then his gaze locked on us through the window. He saw Carter. He saw me. He whispered something to Olivia. She nodded and waved us in. We entered the room. The air was warm and smelled of latex. Carter walked to the side of the bed. He looked down at Mason, and his face was a war zone of conflicting emotions: love, grief, betrayal, confusion. "Hey, Dad," Mason croaked. His voice was rough from the intubation tube. "Hey, son," Carter said. The word son cracked in the middle. "You gave us a scare." "I am okay," Mason said. He looked at Olivia, then at me, and finally, he fixed his eyes on Carter. Mason was 22. But in that moment, he looked older than both of us. He looked like a man who had just survived a car crash only to wake up in a train wreck. He saw the tension. He saw the way Carter was standing, stiff, pulled back, as if he were afraid to touch the bed rails. Mason took a shallow breath, wincing at the pain in his ribs. "Dad," Mason said. "The doctor told me about the blood." Carter froze. "It doesn't matter. Mason, we will figure it out." "I already figured it out," Mason said. He closed his eyes for a second, gathering his strength, and then opened them again. They were clear. They were relentless. "I did a genetic test," Mason said softly. 3 years ago, for a biology project in college. "I didn't tell you because I didn't want to break us." I gasped. My hand flew to my mouth. Carter stared at him. "You knew?" "I knew," Mason said. "I knew you weren't my biological father." "Mason," I sobbed. "Stop." "No, Mom," Mason said. He looked at Carter with an intensity that burned. "Dad, do you want me to tell you the truth? Because I am done with the lies. I almost died on that highway today, and I am not going to spend the rest of my second chance pretending." Carter looked at the boy he loved more than anything in the world. He looked at the boy who wasn't his. He took a deep, shuddering breath. "Tell me," Carter said. "It was 3 years ago," Mason said, his voice gaining strength despite the shallow rise and fall of his chest. "I was 19. It was just a stupid biology elective. We were studying inheritance patterns, and I swabbed my cheek because I wanted to see if I had the gene for tasting cilantro. I sent it into one of those commercial labs." He paused, swallowing dryly. Olivia lifted a cup of water to his lips with a straw. He took a sip and continued, his eyes fixed on Carter. "The results came back 2 weeks later. The ancestry composition was fine, just the usual mix of European stuff, but the close matches, they were wrong. It listed a first cousin I didn't know. A frantic Google search later, I found out she was related to the Harlow family. The name hung in the room like a curse. Harlow." Mason looked at his hands, tangled in the hospital sheets. "I didn't understand at first. I thought the lab made a mistake. So I looked at the blood type data. I learned then what the doctor just told you. 2 O positives cannot make a B negative. It is biologically impossible." "Why didn't you tell me?" Carter asked. His voice was cracked, raw, stripped of all its usual defenses. "Why did you carry that alone?" "Because you are my dad," Mason said fiercely, tears finally spilling onto his cheeks. "You are the one who taught me how to parallel park in the church parking lot. You are the one who sat up with me all night when I had the flu and hallucinated from the fever. You are the one who bandaged my knees when I fell off my bike." He tried to sit up but winced and slumped back. "I looked at you, and I looked at Mom, and I saw how fragile everything was. I thought if I pulled that thread, the whole sweater would unravel. I didn't want to lose you. I didn't want you to look at me and see a mistake. I stood by the wall, unable to breathe. My entire world was reconfiguring itself in real time. For 18 years, I had walked around with the crushing weight of my infidelity with Adrian. I believed that my affair was the original sin, the poison that had killed my marriage. I thought I was the villain of this story, but I was wrong. The story didn't start 18 years ago. It started 23 years ago. The realization hit me with the force of a physical blow. My knees buckled, and I had to lean against the cold plaster of the hospital wall. The night before the wedding, the memory had been locked away, buried under layers of champagne and wedding cake and the sheer, blinding panic of becoming a wife. But now, the door was kicked open. I remembered the bachelorette party. It was at a bar in downtown Tampa. I had been anxious, terrified of the commitment I was about to make. I drank too much. I remembered the room spinning. I remembered feeling sick, unsafe, the lights of the bar blurring into streaks of neon. I remembered someone offering to take me home. Not a stranger, a friend, the best man. Trent? The sensory details came rushing back, sharp and nauseating. The smell of wet wool. It had been raining that night. The scent of his cologne, heavy and musky. The sound of rain drumming on the roof of his car. I remembered him helping me up the porch steps of the house I had just bought with Carter. I remembered fumbling for my keys. I remembered him taking them from my hand. And then, a gap, a black hole in the film reel. I woke up the next morning in my own bed, wearing my pajamas, with a headache that split my skull. I assumed I had passed out. I assumed Trent had been a gentleman, tucked me in, and left. I walked down the aisle 5 hours later, smiling at Carter, thinking I was the luckiest woman in the world. But Trent had disappeared after the wedding. He took a job on the West Coast for 2 years. We didn't see him. When he finally came back, he was loud, jovial. Uncle Trent, the man who brought gifts and slapped Carter on the back. But he knew. God, he knew. Every time he looked at Mason, every time he commented on how tall Mason was getting, he was laughing at us. "It was Trent," I whispered. The room went deadly silent. Carter didn't look surprised. He looked resigned. He closed his eyes, and a single tear tracked through the stubble on his cheek. "I know," Carter said softly. I stared at him. "You know?" "I have known for a long time," Carter said. He opened his eyes and looked at Mason with a tenderness that broke my heart. "When you were about 2 years old, Mason, you started to look like him, the set of the jaw, the way you laughed. I didn't want to believe it. I told myself I was paranoid." He took a deep breath. "But the doubt ate at me. So when you were 5, I did a paternity test, a quiet one. I swabbed your toothbrush." "And you stayed?" I asked, my voice trembling. "You knew he wasn't yours, and you stayed?" "He is mine," Carter said, his voice hardening. "DNA is just code. I am his father. I stayed because I wasn't going to let a child be punished for the sins of adults. I wasn't going to let Trent Harlow destroy my son's life." He turned to look at me, and his expression was a mix of pity and exhaustion. "I never told you, Lucy, because I didn't know if you knew. I didn't know if it was a consensual fling before the wedding or something else. And frankly, I was too cowardly to ask. So I just froze. I built a wall. I decided to protect Mason, even if it meant freezing you out." I covered my mouth to stifle a sob. The coldness, the 18 years of silence. It wasn't just punishment for my affair with Adrian. It was a defense mechanism. Carter had been living in a house with a woman he suspected had betrayed him twice, raising a son who wasn't his, trying to hold back a tidal wave of humiliation with nothing but sheer willpower. He hadn't hated me. He had been surviving. He had been carrying a secret so heavy it had crushed the capacity for love right out of him. "I didn't know," I said, tears streaming down my face. "Carter, I swear to you, I was drunk. I blacked out. I never would have." "I believe you," Carter said. "Now, I believe you now." The tragedy of it washed over us. 3 people, bound together by love and lies, all victims of a man who was probably sleeping soundly in his bed right now, thinking he had gotten away with the perfect crime. And then, a voice cut through the weeping. It was sharp, clear, and cold as steel. "So, let me get this straight." We all turned. Olivia was standing at the foot of the bed. She had been silent for the entire confession, observing, processing, calculating. Now, she looked like a prosecutor closing in for the kill. "Trent Harlow is Mason's biological father," she stated. "And he is also the man who was present at the hospital 18 years ago when the abortion records were signed?" "Yes," Carter said, wiping his eyes. "He helped me with the paperwork." Olivia's eyes narrowed. "Did he have a financial relationship with your company, Mr. White, or with the hospital?" "He was a vendor for Northline," Carter said, confused by the pivot, "and he knew the hospital administrator. That is why he said he could help keep it quiet." Olivia nodded slowly. A dangerous smile touched the corners of her mouth. It wasn't a happy smile. It was the smile of a predator realizing the prey has a limp. "If Trent is the biological father," Olivia said, "he has 18 years of retroactive child support obligations, but that is small potatoes." She walked over to the window, looking out at the Savannah skyline. "The bigger issue is the hospital record. If he was a vendor for your company, and he used his influence to facilitate an emergency medical procedure on the wife of a client, a procedure that conveniently removed a potential heir or source of scandal, while concealing his own biological conflict of interest regarding your existing son." She turned back to us. The accountant was gone. The avenging angel had arrived. "That is fraud," Olivia said. "That is coercion, and if we dig into the audit trails of those hospital logs and cross-reference them with his vendor contracts, I bet we find more than just signatures. I bet we find leverage." She looked at me, then at Carter. "You have spent 20 years being the victims of this man," Olivia said. "You let him haunt your marriage. You let him steal your happiness. You let him think he won." She reached out and took Mason's hand again, squeezing it gently. "But he made one mistake," she said. "He messed with my fiancé, and now we are going to burn his life to the ground." I looked at Olivia, then at Carter. For the first time in 18 years, the ice in Carter's eyes was gone. In its place was a flicker of heat. It wasn't love, not yet, but it was something we could build on. It was anger. It was purpose. "What do we do?" I asked. Carter stood up. He walked over to the bed and placed his hand over Mason's and over Olivia's. "We go home," Carter said, "and we invite Trent over for a chat. For 18 years, my default state of existence was apology. I apologized for breathing too loudly. I apologized for taking up space in the kitchen. I apologized for a betrayal I committed, and for a betrayal I did not even remember committing." But as I sat in the corner of Mason's hospital room, watching the steady rise and fall of his chest, something inside me calcified. The part of me that craved forgiveness died, and in its place, a cold, sharp clarity was born. I was done saying sorry. I was ready to balance the ledger. I pulled a chair next to Olivia. She had her laptop open, the blue light reflecting in her tired eyes. She was not looking at wedding venues or flower arrangements. She was looking at spreadsheets. "We need a plan," I said. My voice was steady, devoid of the tremor that usually haunted it when I spoke to anyone about family matters. Olivia looked at me, and a corner of her mouth quirked up. It was a look of recognition. She saw the steel I had finally found. "We don't just need a plan, Lucy. We need an audit." Olivia walked me through the process with the precision of a surgeon. She explained that hospital records were not just paper in a file. They were digital footprints. Every time a file was opened, modified, or printed, the system logged the user ID and the timestamp. "We need the access logs from 2008, Olivia said, her fingers flying across the keyboard as she drafted a request form for me to sign. We need to prove that Trent didn't just stand there for moral support. We need to prove he was an active participant. If his name appears on any visitor log, or if the timestamp on the consent form matches a time when Carter was documented as being in a different part of the hospital, say, the billing department, then we have him on fraud, or at least undue influence. I signed the release forms, but I did not stop there. I went into the hallway and made a call to a family law attorney named Sarah Jenkins, a woman known for dismantling egos in court with the efficiency of a butcher. I told her I didn't want a divorce lawyer. I wanted a litigator. Then, I hired a forensic accountant. This was my idea, Carter had mentioned years ago, in one of our rare, stilted conversations about money, that Trent did some consulting work for Northline Components. At the time, I thought nothing of it. Just friends helping friends. But now, viewed through the lens of Trent's sociopathy, it looked different. The accountant, a man named Mr. Henderson, who spoke in a whisper, came back to me within 48 hours. We met in a coffee shop far away from the hospital. He slid a folder across the table. "It is subtle, Mr. Henderson said, "but it is there." I opened the folder. It was a list of invoices paid by Northline Components to a company called Harlow Solutions, LLC. For the last 15 years, Mr. Henderson explained, tapping the paper, Northline has paid this entity a retainer of $4,000 a month for logistical advisory services, but I cross-referenced the vendor output. There are no deliverables, no reports, no emails, just an invoice sent on the 1st of the month and a check cut on the 3rd. I stared at the numbers. $4,000 a month, $48,000 a year, over 15 years. That was nearly $750,000. It is a salary, I realized, feeling a fresh wave of nausea. He was billing Carter for silence. It is embezzlement disguised as incompetence, Mr. Henderson corrected. Or if Carter approved these invoices knowing they were fake, it is corporate malfeasance. But given what you told me about the power dynamic, it looks like extortion. Trent used his position as the friend who knows the secret to bleed the company. I closed the folder. This was the ammunition I needed. Trent wasn't just a moral monster who had slept with his best friend's fiancée and then helped cover up the resulting pregnancy. He was a financial parasite. He was a liability that could drag Carter, and by extension, Mason, into a legal nightmare if Northline was ever audited. I went back to the hospital with a strategy that felt less like family therapy and more like a tactical strike. We needed to get Trent in a room. We needed him comfortable. We needed him arrogant. I called him that afternoon. I forced my voice to pitch up into the register of the clueless wife I had played for 2 decades. "Trent," I said into the phone, "it is Lucy. We are bringing Mason home on Thursday. We are just so relieved he is okay. We wanted to have a small family dinner to celebrate. Just us. Carter, Mason, and you. You are family. After all," there was a pause on the line. I could almost hear him calculating, checking the wind direction. "I would love to, Lucy," Trent said, his voice oozing that fake warmth that used to make me uneasy, but now made me want to sharpen a knife. "I have been so worried about the little guy. Count me in. I will bring the wine." "That would be lovely," I said. 7 o'clock. Don't be late." I hung up and looked at Olivia. She nodded. The trap was set. While we waited for Thursday, Sarah, my lawyer, prepared the document package. It was a heavy stack of paper. It included a petition for paternity establishment, a demand for 22 years of retroactive child support based on the income he had siphoned from Northline, and a strict non-disclosure agreement. The NDA was not to protect Trent. It was to protect Mason. We knew that if we went public, Trent might try to spin the story, to sell the scandal to the tabloids, to humiliate us one last time. We needed to bind him so tight that he couldn't even whisper Mason's name without facing bankruptcy. On the morning of the dinner, I found Carter sitting on the back patio of our house. Mason was resting in his room, Olivia guarding him like a hawk. Carter was staring at the pool, the water still and blue. He looked tired. The gray in his hair seemed to have spread in the last few days. He was a man who had held a wall up for half his life, only to watch it crumble in an afternoon. I sat down on the lounger next to him. I didn't offer him a drink. I didn't ask how he slept. "Tonight is going to be ugly," I said. Carter didn't look at me. "I know. I need you to know something," I said. "I am not doing this to fix us. I am not doing this so you will come back to the master bedroom. I am not doing this to save a marriage that died 18 years ago." Carter turned his head slowly. He looked at me with curiosity. "Then why are you doing it?" "Because he stole from us," I said. "He stole Mason's right to know who he was. He stole money from your company. He stole my agency over my own body in that hospital room, and I am tired of being the one who pays the price for his sins." I leaned forward. "I am doing this to cut the cancer out. Carter, once he is gone, once the legal threat is neutralized, you and we can decide what we are, but we cannot decide anything while he is still at the table." Carter looked at me for a long time. He studied my face as if he were seeing me for the first time since the day he caught me holding Adrian's hand. "If you do this," Carter said quietly, "if you corner him, you blow everything up, the reputation, the quiet life, the lie we told the neighbors. You will burn the mask that you have been clinging to for 18 years. I stood up and smoothed my skirt. I looked at the house that had been my prison, and then I looked at the man who had been my warden. "I am burning it," I said. "I am tired of wearing it." Carter held my gaze. Then he gave a small, almost imperceptible nod. "Okay," he said. "Then let's make sure the fire is hot enough." He stood up and walked into the house to get ready. I stayed outside for a moment, listening to the birds singing in the manicured trees. It was a beautiful day for an execution. The evening of the so-called reconciliation dinner arrived with a sky the color of a bruised plum. We were gathered at Mason's house, a small bungalow he rented near the city limits. It was neutral ground. Mason sat on the sofa, his ribs still taped, his face pale but determined. Olivia stood behind him, her hand resting protectively on his shoulder. Carter stood by the fireplace, looking like a man waiting for a firing squad, while I sat at the dining table, my hands folded over a thick manila envelope. At 7 o'clock sharp, the doorbell rang. Trent Harlow walked in as if he owned the place. He was wearing a linen suit that cost more than my first car, carrying a bottle of vintage wine in one hand and a wrapped gift box in the other. He swept into the room with that booming, artificial laughter that had haunted my nightmares for 2 decades. "There is the survivor!" Trent shouted, beaming at Mason. He placed the wine on the table and walked over to Olivia, handing her the gift box. "And a little something for the future. I heard rumors that congratulations are in order for more than just the engagement. A little bird told me we might be hearing the pitter-patter of tiny feet soon." Olivia took the box. She did not smile. She did not say thank you. She placed the unopened gift on the side table next to a stack of medical bills. "Sit down, Trent," I said. My voice was not loud, but it cut through his performance like a guillotine. Trent looked at me, a flicker of annoyance crossing his face before he smoothed it back into a smile. "Serious mood tonight. Lucy? Come on, let's open the wine." "Sit down," Carter repeated. His voice was like grinding gravel. Trent paused. Sensing the shift in atmospheric pressure, he pulled out a chair opposite me and sat, leaning back with an air of bored amusement. "All right, I am sitting. What is this? An intervention?" "In a way," I said. I picked up the manila envelope and slid 2 documents across the table. They stopped right in front of his hands. "The first," I said, pointing to the paper on the left, "is a DNA test confirming that you are Mason's biological father, a fact you have known and hidden for 22 years. Trent didn't flinch. He just stared at the paper. "Genetic tests are notoriously unreliable, Lucy, and even if it were true, what of it? It was a long time ago. The second," I continued, ignoring him, "is a digital access log from the hospital archives dated October 14th, 2008. I tapped the second page. It shows that you didn't just drive Carter to the hospital the night I lost the baby. It shows you signed into the system as a visitor to the administrative wing 40 minutes before Carter signed the consent form. It shows that the consent form was printed from a terminal that requires a vendor clearance code. Your code, Trent. The color drained from Trent's face. It happened in a single second. The arrogant charm evaporated, revealing the ugliness underneath. Carter was watching him, for 30 years. Carter had thought Trent was his best friend who had merely witnessed a tragedy. Now, he realized he had been living with the architect of his misery. "You set it up," Carter whispered. "You didn't just support me. You made sure I signed it. You made sure the pregnancy was terminated." Trent looked at Carter, and his lip curled in a sneer. "I did you a favor. Carter, you were a wreck. You were going to raise another bastard child. I cleaned up the mess. I made sure no one would ever know. I protected your precious reputation." "You protected yourself," I snapped. "You knew if that baby was born, the timeline would be scrutinized. You knew a DNA test on a second child might lead back to the first one. You weren't protecting Carter. You were burying your own tracks." Trent laughed, but it was a brittle, hollow sound. "So what? You have some paperwork. What are you going to do? Sue me? Drag this entire family through the mud? Think about it. Lucy, do you really want the neighbors to know that your perfect husband is a cuckold and your son is illegitimate? You are too afraid of shame to do anything." I looked at him, and I felt a strange sense of peace. He was right about the old Lucy. The old Lucy would have terrified of the whispers, but the old Lucy died in a hospital waiting room 3 days ago. "You are wrong," I said softly. "I would rather be ashamed once than die slowly for 18 more years." I nodded to Olivia. Olivia opened her laptop and turned the screen toward Trent. "This is a forensic audit of the invoices paid by Northline Components to Harlow Solutions," Olivia said, her voice crisp and professional. "You have been billing Carter $4,000 a month for 15 years. We have traced the funds. They go into a shell company, and then straight into your personal investment accounts. You created false invoices for services never rendered. That is wire fraud. Trent, that is embezzlement. And since you used the mail system to send some of these invoices, it is also mail fraud." Trent looked at the spreadsheet, and for the first time, he looked terrified. The threat of social scandal he could handle. The threat of federal prison was different. "Carter," Trent stammered, looking at his old friend. "Carter, look, we can work this out. It was just a consulting fee. I helped you with—" Carter stood up. He didn't yell. He didn't lunge across the table. He just looked at Trent with eyes that were completely dead. "You are not going to take another cent from my family," Carter said. "Not one penny." I slid a thick legal document across the table. "Here's the deal," I said. "Option A. Olivia sends this file to the FBI and the IRS in the morning. You go to prison for fraud. Your assets are seized. Your reputation is destroyed." I tapped the document. "Option B. You sign this. It is a paternity acknowledgement, a surrender of all parental rights, and a binding agreement to pay back every dollar you stole from Northline into a trust fund for Mason's future children. You will also resign from all vendor contracts, and you will never speak to us, or about us, ever again." Trent looked at the document, then at the laptop, then at the three of us. He realized he was surrounded. The weak wife, the duped husband, and the son he had ignored were now a wall of iron. He picked up the pen. His hand was shaking. He signed the papers in silence. When he stood up to leave, he looked smaller. The linen suit seemed to hang off him. He walked to the door, and no one said a word. He opened it, stepped out into the night, and closed the door behind him. The click of the latch was the loudest sound in the world. Mason let out a long, shuddering breath. He began to cry. It wasn't a gentle weeping. It was the raw, heaving sobs of a boy who had been holding his breath for a lifetime. "I am sorry," Mason choked out. I am so sorry I caused all this. Carter walked over to the sofa. He sat down next to Mason and pulled him into a hug. A real hug, fierce and desperate. You didn't cause this, Carter said, his voice thick with emotion. You are the best thing that ever happened to me. You are my son. Do you hear me? You are my son. You are my dad. Mason sobbed into his shoulder. You are the only dad I have ever had. I watched them, tears streaming down my face. The lie was gone. The poison was drained. A week later, I sat in the kitchen of our family home. The boxes were packed. Not mine. Carter's. I had filed the divorce papers that morning. It wasn't an act of war. It was an act of mercy. We had stayed together for Mason. We had stayed together out of fear. Now that the truth was out, the structure that held us together was gone, and we both needed to breathe. Carter walked into the kitchen carrying a suitcase. He was moving to a small cabin in Maine, a place he had always talked about visiting but never did. He looked lighter. The gray fatigue that had coated him for years was lifting. He stopped at the door. He looked at the kitchen, at the table where we had eaten 18 years of silent meals. Then he looked at me. You kept the house? He asked. I kept the house, I said. It needs new paint, bright colors. He nodded. It does? He hesitated, his hand on the doorknob. Then, he walked over to me. He didn't hug me. He didn't kiss me. He reached out and brushed his fingers against the back of my hand. It was a feather-light touch, brief and fleeting, but it carried the weight of a final benediction. I don't know how to forgive everything, he said softly, but I don't hate you anymore. I know, I said. I don't hate you either. He looked me in the eyes, and for the first time in nearly 2 decades, I saw the man I had married, not the roommate I had endured. Now you get to live for real, he said. He turned and walked out the door. I listened to the sound of his car engine fading down the street. I stood in the quiet kitchen, but it wasn't the empty silence of before. It was the silence of a blank page. I looked at my hand, the spot where he had touched me. I was 50 years old. I was divorced. I was alone. But as I walked to the window and opened the blinds to let the sunlight flood in, I realized I wasn't afraid. My life was messy. My history was scarred. But for the first time in 18 years, it was finally mine. Thank you so much for listening to this story. I would love to know where you are tuning in from. So please drop a comment below sharing your location and your thoughts on Lucy's journey. If you enjoyed this story, please subscribe to the Morgan Revenge Stories channel, like the video, and hit that hype button to help this story reach even more people.